Hey guys, today we are going to be talking about analog and digital mixing desks and should you upgrade your analog desk in 2021. So today's video is going to be really short and sweet. The answer is yes, you should. So thanks for watching and I will see you in the next video. You want more than that? Okay then. Okay, so I have a number of points here that I'm going to take you through on the debate of should you upgrade your mixing desk? Is it something worth upgrading this year or in the coming kind of 18 months or so? And overall, as I say, I think yes. I think it is a good thing to do. I think there's a lot of benefits to it. There are, of course, a couple of negatives, and we will go over those as well. But on balance, overall, I think it probably is worth doing. But what I'm going to do is just lay out all the information for you. There are a number of points that you should consider when you're looking at doing this. And hopefully this will help you make an informed decision about whether it's worth upgrading to a digital mixer or sticking with an analog one. So first of all, the first point I want to talk about is quality. Now you will find that a digital mixing desk will be leaps and bounds above the quality of an analog mixing desk. So if you want to increase the quality of your sound, digital mixing desks will do that. I've compared a digital mixing desk to some fairly high quality analog mixing desks. So I'm not just talking about low cost budget analog desks. Even the better quality, more expensive analog mixing desks still sound muddy and muffled in comparison to a digital mixing desk. The quality jump up is in most cases fairly significant and very noticeable. I think you will find that if you upgraded it, you will actually notice an audible sound quality increase in your system, even if you keep the same speakers and amps and everything else. Just because everything is going through your mixing desk, it's processing all that audio for you. And by upgrading to a digital mixing desk, I'm convinced that you will find a noticeable audio quality increase. The second point is going to be flexibility. Flexibility on a digital mixing desk, again, is vastly increased. And what I mean by this is the numbers of inputs and outputs. So often on an analog mixing desk, you will be limited by the number of inputs and outputs that you have available, particularly outputs. As churches look to do more and more things like in-ear monitoring, for example, you find very quickly that you start to run out of outputs from your mixing desk. Most analog mixing desks will be limited to 4 or maybe 6 aux outputs. And although there are ways that you can get around it with in-ear monitors, actually it works a lot better and a lot easier if each band member can have their own monitor mix coming off the desk. But that's just not possible normally on an analog desk. However, with digital, it's normally absolutely fine. Where you might have 4 or 6 outputs on an analog desk, a typical digital mixer could quite easily have 8, 12, 16 outputs. So the number of aux outputs available on a digital desk is almost always going to be vastly more, at least double, if not 3 times or 4 times the number that you have is very, very common on a digital mixing desk. Even sending mixes out to online church platforms or induction loop amplifiers, or even doing local recordings for things like podcasts and stuff like that that you might want to put out, all of those things are going to require outputs from your mixing desk. And it's just so much easier to do that with a digital desk. Okay, so next point is going to be size. Size might be a determining factor for you. Again, generally speaking, digital mixing desks are able to be a lot more compact. Digital mixing desks work using a thing called layers, and layers mean that you can have more than one input per fader. So this mixing desk, for example, is capable of handling something like 40 input channels, but it only has 16 physical faders, and that's because on layer 1 we have faders 1 to 16, and then we flip to layer 2 and now we have 17 to 32, and we can even flip to layer 3 where we have all our input channels from 32 and above. So we get a lot more inputs on a mixing desk that's actually fairly small and fairly compact. If we put it side by side here with this one, this mixing desk has 6 microphone channels plus 2 stereo channels, so we've got 8 faders in total here. But if we look at the size comparison, the analog versus the digital, they're relatively similar. The digital one is slightly bigger, but not vastly bigger, yet it's capable of handling a lot more inputs and a lot more outputs. So the whole thing is just condensed down. If we were to make a desk that could have this many inputs and outputs that was analog, it would be huge. And you may have seen in the past great big analog mixing desks with 32 inputs or even more. And they were massive, huge, great big things. Whereas this desk, now we can reduce this down significantly by making it digital. Another thing to consider is going to be control. Most digital mixing desks offer the option of being able to remote control the sound via an app on a phone or a tablet or something like that. Now, one of the downsides of having all those extra outputs for things like in-ear monitoring is that the job of controlling that sound can become more complicated. With your analog desk, the sound engineer was asked to do a front of house mix coming out of the speakers for the congregation, and then maybe 3 or 4 band mixes going back to the stage. If we go over to a digital system, you're still going to have your front of house mix for the congregation, but now you could quite easily have 6, 8, 10 mixes going back to the stage, and you've got one engineer who's having to manage all of those different mixes of sound. However, if we add remote control to our mixing desk, we can actually say to our band members, you mix your own sound on stage. You don't need to come to me. We can put the app on your phone and you can control it from the stage yourself, and you can set your own band mix on the stage. And that can make band members much happier. They can control that mix themselves. And it can also make the job of the sound engineer a lot easier because they're not having to worry about all the sound that's going back to the stage. The band can just sort that themselves. And most digital mixing desks now, they will have an app that's available both on Android and Apple, and very easy to download, very easy to use. So that's a big bonus for anybody wanting to run multiple band mixes back to the stage. Another benefit might be installation. When it comes to installation with a digital mixing system, most of the time you're going to be using a standard Cat5 Ethernet cable to connect your mixing desk to your stage box at the front. Gone are the days of the great big snake cable, the massive multi-core cable, those great big thick black cables that we had to run from front to back. They were ugly, they were awkward, they were difficult, they were temperamental, they were easily broken and damaged. And those cables, we just don't need them any longer with a digital system. We can do it all now down one Cat5 cable, much smaller, much easier to install, much easier to hide, very cheap to replace. If this does get damaged, Cat5 cable, very quick and easy to replace it, no problem at all. So anybody wanting to install one of these systems might find this a much easier solution than trying to install a multi-core cable down your building. Okay, so what about a couple of the negative points? Well, first of all, anybody who's familiar with the analog mixing desk will find the layout to be very, very different. You'll be used to, with an analog mixing desk, working top to bottom. The controls all run top to bottom in a nice kind of logical, linear way. You don't necessarily see that on a digital mixing desk. Digital, the controls can be dotted around a bit more. They don't follow a particular pattern necessarily. Once you've got your head around it and you understand where things are, they can be fairly intuitive and they can be fairly easy to manage, but it is a very different thing from an analog mixing desk. So if you're used to analog, changing to digital can be something just to get your head around. However, I do think that if you've got no experience of analog, jumping straight in on digital for a lot of people now is actually a lot simpler. The only time it's complicated is when you've got to undo your thinking of analog and then redo digital thinking instead. If you've got no analog experience to undo first of all, and you're just going straight in on digital, actually I think it's easier to pick up. Another negative is probably going to be cost. The costs are going to be more expensive, generally speaking, for a digital mixer than they are for analog. You can pick up an analog mixing desk for typically a few £100s, whereas a digital system, you're going to be looking upper hundreds into thousands of pounds. So it is a bit of a jump up, but digital systems are getting cheaper. If we rewind, say, 5 years or so, digital mixing desks all cost several thousands of pounds to buy. They were all well into the thousands of pounds. Whereas today you can pick up a digital mixing desk for under £1,000. There are a few options at £1,000 or less that you could pick up. So those prices are coming down. And if you are in a position of wanting to do things like in-ear monitoring on your stage, by the time you've purchased things like headphones amps and headphone splitters to do all your monitor mixes across the stage, and any compression and effects and things like that you might need, and if you're connecting into an online service online, you're probably even going to need things like a sound card or something to plug into your computer with. And by the time you've added on all those extra peripherals, actually the costs are probably going to be pretty similar between an analog mixing desk and a budget digital mixing desk. So although costs might go up slightly for a digital mixing desk, they probably aren't going to go up as much as you expect that they might do. However, on the back of costs also comes stage boxes, and we spoke a minute ago about the connection cable to connect them up, but if you're going to go down that route, you also need a digital stage box on stage, and that is more cost. But there are benefits to that as well. One of the big benefits to a digital system is that the microphone preamps are generally housed in the stage box on the stage. Now, in order to understand the benefit of that, we need to just understand exactly what's going on with an analog mixing desk for a minute. Now, if we imagine we've got a microphone with a microphone cable that's being plugged into a multi-core that's then being sent down the building into our mixing desk at the back to be processed. What's actually happening there is your microphone is converting sound waves into an electronic signal. In fact, it's converting it into a voltage. But it is a very, very small voltage. And you can imagine if we take a very, very small voltage and we send it a long distance over a cable, what's going to happen over that distance is that voltage is going to deteriorate slightly. And so by the time it's gone from your microphone through the microphone cable into the stage box, down the multi-core and back to your mixing desk, is that voltage is going to have started to reduce. And it wasn't a big voltage to begin with. So we're going to start to get deterioration in that signal being transmitted front to back. By taking our mic preamps and putting them in our stage box on the stage, we reduce the distance that we're having to send that small voltage before we start to process it. And that all helps with the whole audio quality thing that we discussed at the beginning. That's one of the reasons why you'll find that digital systems are a higher quality, is because we're not having to send those small little low voltage signals a long distance down a cable to process them at the back. We can actually start processing them on the stage. So that's a big bonus for us. And another thing that I've started to see churches doing in the wake of the pandemic is there's more and more churches who are looking to build a TV studio in their buildings. Most churches now are looking to do church online, and that's something that is generally looked at as something that is here to stay. People are going to be doing this going forwards. And so there are a lot of churches who are saying things like, well, a lot of our staff have started working from home. They've been working from home through the pandemic, and that's working well. They're enjoying that. we now have an office space that isn't being used. What could we do with this space? Maybe we could turn that space into our TV studio. And so churches are looking to convert spaces in their buildings into a space where they can broadcast an online service from. But this can bring technical problems because they now need to integrate their main church auditorium sanctuary space with a second TV studio space where they can broadcast an online service from. And so we start to get some fairly complex audio networks having to happen, where we're sending audio from multiple locations and bringing audio in from multiple locations. And really the only sensible way to be able to do this is digital. With analog, it would be incredibly costly and incredibly complex and probably incredibly unreliable. With digital, it's actually pretty simple. There are a number of ways that you can integrate fairly complex multi-location digital networks with a digital system with relatively minimal costs and minimal effort. It's kind of built into most systems. And so if you are looking to expand into those kind of areas, digital is absolutely the way to go. It's very simple, very straightforward with a digital system to do those kind of more complex setups. Okay, so those are probably the key areas that I'd say you want to think through if you're going to look to upgrade from an analog mixing desk to a digital mixing desk. As I say, on balance overall, I would definitely say it's worth doing. The only negative I would say at this stage is probably cost, and if you are particularly low on funds and you're struggling to afford to buy a digital mixing desk, then maybe that might be the reason not to do it. But other than that, most of the time it makes absolute sense that you do go over to that. I would definitely say that's the way the technology is going. More and more digital mixing desks are going to become commonplace in churches. And if anybody is in a position to look to upgrade, I would almost certainly say look at digital, because the flexibility, the longevity of that, the kind of future-proofing of all those things is going to be so much greater in a digital mixing desk than it was in an analog system. As always, if that's been helpful to you, then please like and subscribe and share this video. Those things are really helpful. And if you've got any further questions about digital or analog mixing desks, then please get in touch. Please let me know. I would love to help you out with those. Once again, that's about it for this week, and I will see you in the next video. Take care, guys. See you soon.